My name is Juliana Thorne. For 15 years, I had believed I was married to a visionary, a man of unwavering focus and uncompromising integrity. My husband, Elias Vance, was the celebrated architect behind some of the city's most distinctive towers. We shared a life built on solid foundations, literally and figuratively, or so I thought. Our home, a minimalist structure of glass and steel overlooking the bay, was a testament to his talent and our shared prosperity. But just as the most beautiful skyscraper can hide structural flaws, our perfect life concealed a rot that ran deep. It began subtly, not with whispers in the night, but with silence in the day. Elias had always been obsessive about his work, but his recent preoccupation was different, less about blueprints and more about his phone. Our evenings became a ritual of separation, me in the living room, him in his private study, the door always closed. When I asked about his stress, he simply sighed, mentioning complex litigation involving a rival firm trying to steal his designs. I accepted the lie, trusting the architect who had built our world. The first true fissure appeared 3 months ago, on the day of my annual charity gala. I was getting ready, searching for the antique emerald cufflinks Elias always wore. I found them, not in his dressing table, but tucked into the lining of a forgotten gym bag. Next to them, a small black velvet jeweler's box I didn't recognize. Curiosity, long suppressed by wifely deference, compelled me. Inside the box rested a diamond pendant, a delicate, intricate piece that cost more than my car. It wasn't mine. It bore no resemblance to anything Elias had ever gifted me. My heart didn't sink. It crystallized. In that moment, the vision of the devoted husband dissolved, replaced by the chilling clarity of a potential enemy. I replaced the box and the cufflinks exactly as I found them, but the image of that unauthorized, extravagant gift lodged in my mind like a bullet. Over the next few weeks, I began my quiet investigation, starting where most architects leave their deepest secrets, their digital blueprints. I am not a forensic accountant, but I manage the foundation that bears our name, giving me legitimate access to our financial infrastructure. I delved into the firm's expenditure reports, cross-referencing company accounts with personal outflows. The firm's money was clean, professionally managed by his CFO, but our personal finances, which Elias had insisted on handling entirely himself for the past 5 years to free up your time for the foundation, darling, were a mess of calculated deceit. I discovered a shadow trail, an array of payments routed through a shell company called Ethel Inc., ostensibly for design consultation fees. These fees were enormous, totaling nearly $800,000 over the last 18 months. The money wasn't flowing to a rival firm. It was draining into a single, private account. The account holder's name was Serafina Rue. Serafina Rue. The name was unfamiliar, but the pattern was not. She was the recipient of the diamond pendant and the architect of my marital destruction. But the transactions were more than just gifts. They were strategic. The payments were structured to avoid flagging as massive transfers, staying just below the threshold that would require dual signature approval. Elias wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically liquidating our shared capital to fund a secondary life. I knew then that confronting him would be useless. Elias was a master manipulator, a man who could talk himself out of a zoning violation, let alone a marriage crisis. If I showed my hand, he would accelerate his plan, cutting me off entirely. I needed proof, not just of infidelity, but of financial malfeasance, the only thing that could truly level his towering arrogance. My first call wasn't to a divorce lawyer, but to Mr. Alastair Finch, an old, quiet, and extremely expensive corporate attorney known for his ruthless discretion. He specialized not in divorce, but in complex asset protection and corporate dissolution. Juliana, he drawled over the phone, his voice sounding like dry sherry. You sound like you're ordering a firing squad. I am, Alastair. I need to know how to legally separate myself from a sinking ship without causing a panic on deck. The ship, in this case, is worth hundreds of millions, and the captain is systematically looting the cargo before scuttling it. I presented him with my findings, the Ethel Inc. transactions, the identity of Serafina Rue, and the pattern of calculated asset reduction. Alistair's professional demeanor never wavered, but I heard the shift in his voice, the recognition of a genuinely high-stakes play. Your husband is attempting to build a moat around his wealth, Alistair concluded. He's funding a separate life and preparing for a divorce where he can claim his legitimate business assets are separate from marital funds, while the marital funds themselves have mysteriously dwindled. We need to secure your liquidity immediately, before he realizes you're auditing his foundation. The next few weeks were a blur of calculated, quiet action. My involvement in the foundation, previously a hobby, became my shield. Under the guise of a major upcoming endowment review, I consolidated all my personal assets and property into a tightly managed trust, named after my grandmother, a clear, historically justifiable name that would not raise suspicion. I retained legal ownership of the family home's deed, which Elias had carelessly allowed to remain in my name for tax reasons years ago. Then came the next chilling discovery. I found a printed, bound document tucked away in the back of his safe, a draft prenuptial agreement renewal. It wasn't signed, but the date on the header was just 2 months prior. The terms were draconian. It would reclassify all future income and intellectual property as separate property, effectively cutting me out of any future value of his firm, Vance Architecture. More damningly, it included an indemnity clause requiring me to assume all existing personal liabilities not associated with the firm, a clear attempt to offload the Ethel Inc. debt he had created. He wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to make me assume the financial consequences of his infidelity while leaving me penniless. I took the document, scanned it securely, and replaced the original. I now had the full architectural plan of his betrayal. He thought he was preparing a swift, clean surgical strike. He didn't realize I was now holding the detonation codes. I had moved my money. I had secured the house. And I had evidence of his malicious, premeditated intent. Now, all that was left was to let Elias make his move. The trap was set. The waiting period was agonizing, a forced stillness before the storm. I continued my routine, attending foundation meetings, overseeing household staff, and hosting elegant, if strained, dinners. Elias, oblivious to the fact that I had studied his entire demolition plan, grew noticeably bolder. The closed-door phone calls lasted longer. He began taking frequent consulting trips to Montreal, which, according to the Ethel Inc. transactions, was where Serafina Rue maintained her lavish, Elias-funded apartment. I gave him 3 weeks. 3 weeks for him to feel fully secure, fully in control of the fiction he was building. The moment arrived one rainy Tuesday evening. Elias was on the phone in his study, the door thankfully ajar for once. I heard him, his voice low and confident. Yes, the foundation documents are mostly finalized. We'll file the motion next week. She'll be completely blindsided, I promise. Just ensure the final payment to Ethel goes through before the end of the quarter. He was filing for divorce, and he was planning to surprise me with the paperwork, likely on a Friday afternoon when my access to counsel would be limited. He had signed his own warrant. That night, I waited until Elias was asleep, his breathing heavy and regular, the sleep of a man who believes he has conquered the world. I slipped out of bed, went to his study, and logged into the firm's main account interface, a dashboard I knew well from my foundation work. I didn't touch the funds. Instead, I used my administrator access to review the system permissions. With a few precise and traceable strokes, I adjusted the security protocols on his personal investment portfolio. I didn't steal anything. I simply secured it, the unwanted document. The next morning, I was sipping coffee in the sunroom, reviewing legitimate foundation documents, when Elias finally made his move. He strode in, dressed impeccably, holding a manila envelope. His expression was carefully modulated to convey regret mixed with firm resolve. The performance was flawless. "Juliana," he began, his voice dropping to a sympathetic baritone, "we need to talk. I think you know this has been coming for a long time." I looked up, feigning confusion. "Coming? Elias, what are you talking about?" He sighed dramatically, sliding the envelope toward me. "I've filed for dissolution. It's for the best. We've simply grown too far apart." I picked up the heavy envelope, my hands trembling, a brilliant performance of shock. I opened it slowly, pulling out the petition for dissolution of marriage. My eyes skimmed the document until they landed on the financial declaration, a brutal misrepresentation of our marital estate. He had classified almost all his architectural firm assets and intellectual property as separate property, claiming they predated the marriage or were acquired through sole effort, while severely undervaluing our jointly held real estate. Most alarmingly, he listed the debt owed to the Ethel Inc. Shell Company as a significant marital liability that needed to be settled from my share of the remaining assets. He was demanding I pay for his mistress. The audacity was dizzying. I let the paper fall onto the glass table, meeting his gaze with a forced, teary resignation. I need to call Alistair. I can't look at this right now." The mention of Alistair Finch caught him off guard. Elias had assumed I'd call a standard divorce lawyer, someone he could easily overpower. "Alistair Finch?" He scoffed. "He's corporate law, Juliana. Don't waste his time or ours. This is simple, amicable. We'll keep things fair." "Fair?" I whispered, playing the victim one last time. "You list Ethel Inc. as a liability I have to cover. What is Ethel Inc., Elias?" His face went instantly cold. "That is confidential business information. It's a consulting fee for a project liability that your foundation work has no business questioning." The mask of regret vanished, replaced by the grim focus of a hostile architect. I pushed back my chair and stood, taking one final, calculated look at him. "I'll instruct Alistair to handle all communications from this point forward." I left him standing alone in the sunroom, victorious, but unaware that his opponent was now the man who specialized in corporate warfare. The alarm bells. Elias spent the afternoon feeling triumphant. I meanwhile met with Alistair. Within hours, Alistair filed our response, a calm, devastating counterclaim demanding an immediate, comprehensive forensic audit of all corporate and personal accounts dating back 3 years, with a specific focus on all transactions involving shell companies or third-party consultants. The motion cited concerns over potential dissipation of marital assets and undisclosed financial liabilities. Elias's lawyer, a competent but unremarkable family law specialist, immediately called Alistair, demanding the audit motion be withdrawn. Alistair's response was simple: "Show us the Ethel Inc. ledger and the source of the funds flowing to it, and we will reconsider." The true panic for Elias began the next morning. He woke up to an urgent email from his wealth manager regarding a technical glitch. Elias was attempting to move a significant sum, nearly $500,000, out of his personal investment portfolio, likely to fund a new legal retainer or perhaps a final, frantic transfer to Sarafi Nauru. The transfer was rejected. Authentication failure. Dual signature required. He immediately called his wealth manager, furious. "What the hell is this? I never authorized a dual signature protocol. It appears to have been applied during the general security overhaul yesterday, sir," the manager stated, clearly having been pre-briefed by Alistair's team. "It requires signature verification from the authorized secondary party, Thorn Trust Legal Counsel. We cannot process the transfer without it." Elias slammed down the phone. He raced to his study, pulling up the account details. There it was, the name of Alistair's firm, listed as the legal counsel for my newly established, historically justifiable trust. He realized instantly that I had not only moved my own assets, but had also locked down his. The architect realized his foundation was not only cracked, but actively crumbling beneath his feet. His first thought was damage control. He couldn't risk a confrontation with me. He needed to talk to the one person who could reassure him the plan was still sound. He called Serafina Rue. "The plan is compromised," he hissed into the phone. "Juliana has locked down the accounts. We need to speed up the Ethel filing and use that other information immediately. I need you to sign the final affidavit for the DA today." He thought he was being cautious, but he was cementing his fate, because at that very moment, across town in Alastair Finch's office, my team was preparing to submit the full forensic audit request to the court, complete with the firm's new meticulously detailed evidence, the Ethel Inc. transaction ledger, the Montreal addresses, and the initial blueprint for the prenuptial agreement renewal. The collapse was no longer theoretical. The architect was now standing in the rubble of his own design. The criminal investigation into Elias was swift and silent, precisely what Alastair Finch had promised. While the divorce remained technically active, the real fight had moved off the civil chessboard and into the criminal arena. The moment Elias and Serafina Rue were officially flagged for conspiracy to commit fraud and filing a false instrument, the dynamics shifted irreversibly. The desperate counterattack. Elias, panicked and realizing his wealth was frozen by the enhanced security compliance, retreated to his last viable weapon, public opinion. He couldn't move money, but he could move mud. First, a carefully placed story appeared in a niche architectural blog, hinting that the sudden instability at Vance Architecture was due to a vindictive, financially reckless spouse who had attempted to illegally seize control of the firm's assets. The story implied that Juliana, was unstable and had moved funds wildly, necessitating Elias's protective legal measures. Second, he intensified his legal pressure. He didn't know I had the USB drive, but he knew I had locked his accounts. His lawyer filed an emergency motion demanding the immediate release of his investment portfolio, claiming I had breached my fiduciary duty by tampering with his solo access security settings. He framed it as an act of financial violence. "He's trying to make me look like a crazed woman," I stated to Alastair, my voice tight. He is desperate to free up the cash to pay off Serafina and fund his new legal defense. Alastair merely smiled, adjusting his cufflinks. "We anticipated this. Let him scream. Every accusation he levels against you only makes the evidence on this drive more potent in the Dai's eyes. It shows his malicious intent." Our counter move was delayed, tactical, and designed for maximum impact. We didn't respond to the blog. We didn't contest the emergency motion immediately. We waited until the court date for his motion was set. The unveiling in chambers. The meeting was held in the judge's private chambers, a common setting for discussing complex, sensitive financial motions to prevent public exposure. Elias was there with his family law attorney. I was there with Alastair Finch. Elias's attorney began, detailing my outrageous actions, painting me as a sudden, malicious threat to Vance Architecture. Mrs. Thorne's actions in unilaterally freezing Mr. Vance's personal and business accounts demonstrate a clear pattern of harassment and financial sabotage, the attorney argued. We demand the immediate restoration of sole control to Mr. Vance and sanctions against Mrs. Thorne. When it was Alastair's turn, he didn't address the freezing of the accounts. Instead, he smoothly directed the judge's attention to the larger picture. Your Honor, we acknowledge the urgency regarding the accounts, but we believe those actions were justified under the doctrine of asset preservation, Alastair stated calmly. Mrs. Thorne acted only after she discovered evidence that Mr. Vance was systematically dissipating marital assets and, far worse, conspiring with a third party to level false criminal charges against her. He then slid a single thin file across the judge's desk, not the full USB contents, but the district attorney's official file stamp confirming the opening of an investigation into Elias Vance and Serafina Rue for conspiracy to commit fraud. Elias visibly froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly white. He had not anticipated that his desperate attempt to leverage the Dowie's office against me would be the very thing I used to dismantle his standing. Your Honor, Alistair continued, his voice resonating with authority, we believe the freezing of Mr. Vance's accounts was necessary to preserve marital assets that are now subject to criminal forfeiture, as those funds were being funneled to Mr. Vance's accomplice, Serafina Rue, through the shell entity, Ethel, Inc. We have evidence provided to the DA that Mr. Vance utilized the Ethel payments which he attempted to assign as a marital liability to Mrs. Thorne to fund his mistress and coordinate the filing of a fabricated fraud claim against my client. The judge stared at Elias, then at the file. The motion for the release of funds was immediately thrown into chaos. The judge did not release the funds. Instead, she ordered an emergency custodial freeze on all accounts pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Elias was trapped. He was publicly humiliated, legally restrained, and now facing a criminal inquiry, all triggered by the very mechanism he had tried to weaponize against me. The last word. After the meeting, Elias cornered me in the hallway outside the chambers. His face was distorted by rage and disbelief. You knew, he spat, his voice shaking. You planned this. You played me. I met his gaze, no longer the teary victim of the sunroom, but the unflinching architect of his downfall. You planned to make me pay for your affair, Elias, I said softly, but with the cold weight of granite. You asked me to assume the liability of Ethel Inc. and Serafina Rue. You filed a false criminal complaint to strip me of my reputation and my assets. You wanted to destroy me. I paused, allowing the full weight of the truth to sink into him. You are a brilliant architect, Elias, but you forgot the most fundamental rule of structural design. Never build a trap beneath your own foundation. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the celebrated builder, now watching his entire legacy, his wealth, and his freedom collapse around him. The divorce would proceed, but the terms were now dictated by the DA's investigation. I had secured my financial future, my reputation was cleared by the state, and the architect of my marital betrayal had become the architect of his own ruin. The legal battle following the chambers meeting was less a war and more a process of forced surrender. With a criminal investigation looming, Elias Vance had lost all leverage. His family law attorney withdrew from the case, and his new pricey criminal defense lawyer immediately advised him to prioritize mitigating the DA's charges over fighting the divorce. The final settlement, a Pyrrhic victory. The final settlement meeting took place 3 weeks after the judge's custodial freeze. Elias was gaunt, his arrogance replaced by a brittle, terrified resignation. He was no longer the architect of our future, but a man clinging to his last few beams of stability. The terms of the settlement, drafted by Alistair Finch and effectively uncontested, were devastating to Elias. The marital home, the house which had remained entirely in my name, was confirmed as my sole property. Elias was given 48 hours to vacate. Asset division. I received the entirety of the liquid marital assets that remained in my name or the Thorne Trust, which represented over 70% of the original estate before Elias began his dissipation scheme. The firm, Elias, retained Vance Architecture, but a court-appointed monitor was assigned for 2 years to oversee all large financial transactions to ensure compliance with the ongoing criminal investigation. This effectively stripped him of autonomy and damaged the firm's credibility. Liabilities. Elias was solely responsible for all debt associated with Ethel Inc. and its transactions with Serafina Rue. Furthermore, The court ordered him to pay a substantial lump sum payment of $3.5 million to the Thorn Trust as restitution for the attempted dissipation of marital assets, a penalty that ensured I was made financially whole. Spousal support. Neither party received or paid spousal support, given the equal earning capacity and the egregious nature of Elias's actions. The final decree was signed. Elias tried one last time to regain some control, his voice barely a whisper. "You've ruined me, Juliana. Everything I built." I looked across the polished mahogany table at the man who had tried to build my financial ruin. "You ruined yourself, Elias. You designed a fraudulent structure and forgot to include a safe exit. The aftermath and new foundations, the public fallout was swift. While the divorce settlement was sealed, the news of the Dowie's investigation into Elias Vance and a consultant for fraud became a major story. Architectural projects were put on hold, contracts were terminated, and the Vance architecture brand became synonymous with scandal. Serafina Rue was quickly abandoned by Elias and, faced with overwhelming evidence, agreed to cooperate with the DA, testifying about Elias's manipulation and the conspiracy to frame me. Her cooperation minimized her exposure, but fully implicated Elias. 6 months later, Elias Vance accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to obstruct justice and wire fraud, resulting in heavy fines, intense probation, and a permanent stain on his professional license. He was financially solvent, but professionally destroyed. My life, however, began anew. I immediately sold the glass and steel house overlooking the bay. It was a monument to a life I no longer wanted. I used the proceeds and the restitution funds to purchase a classic, traditional home and, more importantly, to fund my true passion. I renamed the Thorn Foundation to the Juliana Thorn Resilience Fund. With Alastair Finch as the legal counsel, the foundation shifted its focus from arts and architecture to providing financial and legal support for women recovering from economic abuse and high-conflict divorce. I used my own experience, my detailed knowledge of asset manipulation, and my settlement to ensure other women could fight back against architects of betrayal. My final act was not one of revenge, but of true, structural independence. I sent a simple, sealed note to Elias's probation officer, detailing how the restitution funds were being used. The note simply read, "Elias designed a trap. I used the materials he provided to build an escape route for others. He taught me that the strongest foundations are built on truth, not steel." I was no longer the wife of the celebrated architect. I was Juliana Thorn, and I had designed a much stronger future. My new life was not built on someone else's blueprints, but on my own, solid, unassailable foundations. Thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel and get more new story regularly.